All right, maybe you can start off just say your name.
Paul DeRienzo.
Okay, and tell me about how do you remember that night?
Well, it was a really, really hot night. And I knew something was going to happen because a week before there had been a smaller confrontation in which the police seemed particularly aggressive.
Yeah.
And so I got the impression something was going to happen. Little did I know what was going to happen. It was very, very hot. It was one of these hottest summers on record in New York. It was like every day it was 90 degrees plus, and at night it was hot and humid too. And people in those days, you know, dating myself, air conditioners were actually not as common as they are today. And people used to come out here into the park and spend the hot summer nights in the park, which was the tradition, and they didn't have a curfew here. So the curfew, I guess, is on the books, but nobody enforced it in like 50 years or something. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the cops or somebody who's never been figured out who paints park closed at midnight at every entrance to the park, and then they start like enforcing it. And people were so shocked that they enforced it that like nobody knew what to listen to them or not. You know, like, are we really supposed to leave? I mean, what's going on here? And it turned out the city councilwoman was away on vacation visiting her brother in California, and some like right-wing troublemakers on her board who were a minority had seized like interim control of the board that summer, and they decided to make their big move to enforce the curfew in the park. That's what came out well known. So I didn't know this. So coming here, I just noticed that there was a police base right here in the middle of the park, and there was all these people protesting, about 200 or 300 people marching around in the park right before midnight. And I went to the commander, and the commander was hot bent for trouble. He was gonna, I'll show you, you can't treat me this way, blah, blah, blah. And I was a bit shocked by how aggressive this officer, Commander McNamara was. So I suggested that they give this up and go away, and that they would defuse the situation and deal with it in another venue. And he was determined, no, I'm not leaving. That was a big mistake. Later on, we talked, and he admitted it was a big mistake in his police career, at the end of his career. And so he was, the people, they forced them out, they successfully forced them out into the streets where all these like unknowing people from the bars and the regular club scene were intermixing with the demonstrators, and their numbers started to swell to large and large numbers, like thousands of people. And the officer flipped out, as it came out in the report afterwards, and you could see it there. All of a sudden they brought in all these cops on horseback, and they started marching up and down Avenue Way, and then they even got the people off the street onto the sidewalk, and they wanted them to clear the streets, clear the sidewalk, and people would just refuse to go. So they actually, on horseback, and cops who were with shields, big plastic shields, just without warning, just boom, they just attacked the crowd. And I have that on tape. It's amazing, the stuff, you'll hear it on the tape. And then a helicopter came out of nowhere, and it was like literally like just above those trees we're looking at right now. And imagine this entire green space looking like a dust storm in Iraq. It's amazing what a helicopter 50 feet from the ground can do. And it knocked over stuff, and the people were coming out of what the hell's going on? It's war, you know? It's like an early 9/11, but without the massive destruction caused by the police and not Al-Qaeda. And so yeah, they attacked, but of course people wouldn't go away, and they just basically were attacking them and up and down the streets. And when all these cops came, like 38,000, the 1085 they gave, the cops did not know why they were coming. They just thought, oh my God, it could be anything, right? And they came rushing in, and I guess the geometry, the cop was very inexperienced, the commander. The geometry of putting the base in the middle, forcing everybody out in a ring, and then having your reinforcements have to fight through the ring to get in to find out what's going on. It was like a bad idea. It turned out, I didn't know, I wouldn't have known that. What do I know? But it turned out to be a very bad idea, because when the cops came, their first impulse, cop in trouble, is to save the cop in trouble at the source of the call, which is in the middle of the park. So anything they saw between them and that is enemy, and they literally, I mean, I'm not exaggerating, they beat their way through the crowd. And there was a number of people, 129 people were injured, and I think 6 cops were brought up on charges, but none were ever convicted. However, I did hear that although no cops were ever convicted, basically 2 or 3 of them had their total, 4 cops got their careers totally ruined, and they got huge legal bills, so they had to use their own lawyers, and it was a big pain in the ass. And I think that's why the police are itchy about it. Even 20 years later, it's like not a high. They just don't like being reminded of those bad days, bad old days.
Yeah, and you immediately started reporting it.
Yeah, I was out there with my tape recorder, because I had been the week before when there had been the smaller conflict, which I've told to many people, and it's been written about in Village Voice and what have you. But you know, a week, Jerry the Peddler and a bunch of people came from the Morton Downey show drunk, and for a big party with the Guardian Angels, and Morton Downey was trying to reconcile the Guardian Angels and the anarchists. And instead, he got them all really drunk at this free open bar, and they then sent them back in a limo or cabs or whatever the story is. And they came back here just as the cops, for the first time ever, with just a few of us in the park, were going to enforce the curfew. And Jerry shook up a beer can, I guess, and opened it, and it exploded in the cops. The cops said, "I'm not going to arrest you, Jerry. I'm not going to arrest you. I'm not going to arrest you." So he took an open beer, a beer can, and he shook it up right in front of the cop and said, "I'm not going to arrest you," and popped it open, and half the beer just sprayed all over the cop. And then he said, "Now I'm going to arrest you, Jerry." And so they grabbed him, they put him in the police car. Out of nowhere, about 10 40-ounce beer bottles came flying out of the shadows and smashed against the police car. So the cops, who were in, not a few of them, ran into the shadows, and I guess there was a fight broke out, and a bunch of cops were injured in the fight. This is what I was, reported in the papers, and I saw some. And a cop came over to me, and he stepped on my toes like this. I'm just standing there like you, sort of like, I wasn't taping it, but I was like watching, and he steps on my toes, and I'm like, that's the first time anybody ever did that to me. And I'm like, oh, I see, you're trying to get me all worked up, and I just stepped back, and got out of it.
How much did gentrification have to do with what was going on?
The first thing was just about the park. It was mostly not gentrifiers, but actually people who were older in the community and the kids who were part of it, they weren't conservatives, but they were like liberal Democrats who wanted the noise, and some of them were worked with the police and really thought the police were cool and were on the police council and police athletic league and police this and police that. Those people were, and they were somewhat conservative, and they didn't like the socialist communist types who were on the controlling the board then, like a lot of former CPers and people who were active in the 50s and had reputations. They're old now, and these kind of reputations. They were protecting the park. And then you had a lot of people, somebody used to say about the Lower East Side in those days, I read something, it was Jewish Holocaust survivors living next to their former concentration camp commanders in the Lower East Side. And politics sort of were like that.
Exactly. And so what do the riots mean, 20 years later? I mean, did anything come of it?
Well, they marketed it into the rents being so high. I mean, I have no problems with the guy writing Rent. He seems like a very creative fellow, although I was disgusted by the thought of people blatantly ripping off everything we did and turning it into a Broadway play. It could have at least been an indie film or something, Jesus Christ. And then that horrible movie they made out of it. And all the straights from all over the world. I mean, I was a tour guide for a while, and people want to go rent. I mean, they come from all over the world, groups of 75 people on buses to go see Rent. So that they marketed it successfully. Rebellion. You can market rebellion. But as the Clash said, turning rebellion into money, right? Just like the Clash said.
Yeah, definitely. All right.